Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Listener discretion is advised. We've all seen hostage standoffs. In 2019, we can watch them in the palm of our hands. But in September of 2003, we had to watch on television or listen on the radio. Breaking news cut into regularly scheduled programming to alert citizens of Greenville, South Carolina, to a hostage standoff at a buy-low grocery store. Charles Christopher Williams had calmly walked into the store armed with a shotgun, looking for his ex-girlfriend, Mandy Leigh Williams. He found her in the deli, the section she worked in, and forced her into a small office nearby as managers and associates quickly escorted shoppers out of the building. As the Greenville County SWAT team surrounded the store, Mandy called 911 and then gave the phone to Williams to speak with hostage negotiators. This went on for almost 2 hours before Mandy suddenly made a run for it. Charles Williams shot her in the back as she ran. She was killed almost instantly, found face down in the deli as SWAT came in and took Williams away. He had put down his gun and went willingly, later confessing. It was a tragic ending to a domestic violence case, a system that failed, and 20-year-old Charles Williams was sentenced to death. But recently, he was granted an appeal and scheduled for resentencing with the state. Should he have been on death row to begin with? I'm not here to debate the death penalty, but to look at this tragic case and see how he got there. Welcome to episode 43, Hostage Standoff, the Murder of Mandy Leigh Williams. Greenville, South Carolina is in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a part of the larger Appalachian Mountain Range. It's a mid-sized city with around 60,000 residents. There are several small parochial colleges and a couple of technical schools, and the racial makeup is about 60% white and 30% black, with Native American, Hispanic, and Asians making up the rest of the population. Once named as one of the top 100 arts small towns in the United States, the culture is very much dominated by the arts. There are museums and galleries, along with arenas and other venues for music. It's a beautiful southern city, with the Reedy River, a tributary of the Saluda River, running right through the center. Miranda Leigh Williams was born there on June 7, 1979, to parents Gary and Patricia. Mandy, as she was called, was the youngest of 5 siblings and was known as a cheerful, loving woman and a devoted young mother. She graduated from Wren High School in the small town of Piedmont, where she grew up. Piedmont is a town of less than 6,000 residents that rests along the Saluda River. At the time of her death, Mandy was 24 and her daughter Callista was only 2 years old. Friends and family said that Mandy's life revolved around her daughter. Pat, Mandy's mom, told the Greenville News that Mandy took Callista everywhere, wanting her to experience everything, even if the toddler was a bit young. On the day she was murdered, she had planned to take her daughter to the South Carolina Upper State Fair that evening and had plans to spend time on her family's pontoon boat at Lake Hartwell that weekend. Charles Christopher Williams, 4 years younger than Mandy and no relation, though they had the same last name, had met her while working at a buy-low grocery store on Woodruff Road in Greenville sometime in November of 2002. Charles immediately became infatuated with Mandy, even branding the letter M into his arm. His father, who called him Chris, said that Mandy was his first real girlfriend. The relationship was characterized as on and off by several sources, but Mandy's family members say that she broke up with Charles in May of 2003 after a trip to the beach. Charles had led a difficult life as a child. He was born into a neglectful and abusive home. His parents, Dwight Williams and Daisy Huckabee, divorced when he was a small child, and his sister Maureen later said her parents were negligent alcoholics and that Daisy even drank while pregnant with Charles. The divorce was traumatic for the kids. Maureen even recalled her father burning their baby books and pictures in the yard in anger when their mother walked out. Later, when she testified for her brother, Maureen said she had no emotional connection to her parents. And though she sought help as she grew older and learned to deal with the trauma, Charles never did. He also had trouble in school. He struggled with his grades and was later said to have undiagnosed and untreated ADHD. He quit high school his sophomore year and later enrolled in a technical school, but didn't do well there either and quickly dropped out. At the time of the murder, Charles was living with his mother and stepfather in Simpsonville, another small town located in Greenville County. After his breakup with Mandy, Charles attempted suicide in June by swallowing 50 pills. He recovered and even took himself to a hospital saying he was suicidal, but he was not admitted for evaluation. In the meantime, Mandy had moved to a different buy-low grocery store in Greenville. Her family later said it wasn't really to get away from Charles, but was because she wanted to work the first shift so that she could spend more time with her daughter. She worked in the deli and was also training for management. Another reason she switched stores was the opportunity for advancement. Mandy was a hard worker and a well-liked employee both to management and her co-workers. On July 16th, Charles showed up to the buy-low Mandy was working at on Northeast Street and tried to talk to her. She had her manager ask him to leave, and she thought he did, but instead, he waited 4 hours in the parking lot for her to get off work. The Greenville County Sheriff's incident report said that he ran up to her car and jumped in on the passenger side. She begged him to get out, but he wouldn't, so she got out and started running towards the store to get her manager. But when she saw him get out of her car, she ran back and jumped in, locking the doors. But as she was trying to roll up her window, Charles reached through the driver's side and punched her repeatedly in the face until she fell unconscious. She was taken to Greenville Memorial Hospital, where it was discovered that several bones in her face had been shattered. On July 17th, Charles Williams was charged with assault and battery with intent to kill. His bond was set at $45,000, and he made bail with a bondsman and was out the very next day. Many domestic violence experts and others associated with the case have criticized the decision to give Williams bond. But others point out that it's not unusual and that he was entitled to a reasonable bond. Any other restrictions are decided on a case-by-case basis by the judge, who evidently in this case felt no need to put further restrictions on Charles Williams. Domestic abuse advocates feel he should have been denied bail, and it is hard to swallow, especially considering they added intent to kill to the charge. But murderers get out on bond all the time as they await trial. Charles had shown extreme violence, but he's no different than many abusers who get arrested only to bail out the next day. So Mandy did what many victims do. She tried to follow up and protect herself. She went to the Greenville County Magistrate's office to file a restraining order. She got the paperwork, but she also got a depressing tip from a clerk, one that made her drop the matter. The clerk told her even if the restraining order was granted, it was little protection from someone who really meant to kill her. Sadly, this is true. As one prosecutor put it, a restraining order cannot stop a bullet. But civil clerks should not be discouraging victims from filing anyway. To get a restraining order in South Carolina, you have to show at least 2 prior incidents of stalking or harassment within the past 90 days. Mandy only had the one violent assault on record, though I do believe friends or co-workers could have testified to Charles's stalking. One paper mentioned that she often complained about him following her around. So it's not like it wasn't known. But Mandy's father, who went with her to the magistrate's office, said that she left without filing the papers after what the clerk told her. And for what it's worth, Bilo Grocery got their own no trespassing order against Charles Williams. Not that it wound up doing any good. Mandy was not eligible for an order of protection, which is much easier to get, because she didn't live with Charles and was not married or related to him. But a restraining order is usually the first step for someone in Mandy's situation. Once you've gotten the order and your abuser violates it, you've started the necessary paper trail. In Mandy's case, if Charles had simply shown up at her work again to try to talk to her, he would be violating the order and his bail could have been revoked. And we cannot know for sure that the restraining order would not have been a deterrent in this case. Charles Williams did not have a violent criminal record. Though he never finished high school, he was not involved in drugs or other criminal activities. But I think it's fair to say that he was obsessed with Mandy and may have ignored the order anyway. But there's no way to be sure. All we can do now is wonder if a restraining order may have helped. The morning of Wednesday, September 3rd, 2003, started out normal. Mandy clocked in at 8 a.m. and was her usual cheerful self. Despite the vicious July attack, the young woman was determined to move on with her life and not let it destroy her. And as I said, she had plans to take her daughter to the fair that evening and lake plans for the weekend. It had been almost 2 months since the attack. She was healing and evidently had not heard from Charles again, though I am not certain of that. If she had heard from him, it was not reported in the media nor mentioned in court. At 10 a.m., Charles Christopher Williams walked into the Bilo grocery store armed with a loaded shotgun. He was dressed in a camouflage shirt and had 5 more bullets strapped to his leg. He went straight to the deli section where Mandy worked. Managers and employees saw the gun and quickly and quietly grabbed customers' arms and led them from the store to safety. They were all later commended for their calmness and quick thinking. But Charles grabbed Mandy and forced her into a small office near the deli. He kept the shotgun aimed at her and ordered her to dial 911. She told the operator that Williams would shoot her if anyone approached them. The Greenville County SWAT team surrounded the building within minutes, and the negotiators started calling Charles's phone. He would tell them, "I just need to talk to her," and call back in 10 minutes. Sometimes he would just hang up on them. Over the course of the next 90 minutes, Charles would speak to hostage negotiators 4 times. They later reported that he seemed calm and fairly reasonable, and they felt he would eventually surrender without hurting Mandy. But as time passed, Mandy became more hysterical. It's easy to understand. We don't know for sure what Charles was saying to her, but in the last phone call to police that was played in court, Mandy can be heard screaming in the background that he was going to kill her. She must have believed him, because she unexpectedly broke and made a run for it through the deli on her way to the outside door. Charles Williams fired 5 shots from the shotgun at her back, hitting her 3 times, once almost severing her right arm and twice in her back. She died as she fell, almost instantly. Charles then wedged the shotgun between the door to the deli and the door to the office. He was on his cell phone as SWAT burst into the building. One of the SWAT team members listening through air vents had heard the shots and the team moved immediately, but it was too late. Mandy Lee Williams was dead. And her murderer put his hands in the air and surrendered. The scene outside was chaos. The parking lot was filled with employees and shoppers from other businesses in the same strip mall that had been evacuated. The media was there with several news stations broadcasting live. And there were plenty of looky-loos. The Greenville News reported that many sipped iced tea and lemonade from a nearby bagel shop as they watched the scene unfold. Mandy's mother was in the parking lot and was told by a SWAT team member that her daughter didn't make it. She fell to the ground screaming her grief, and the crowd grew silent. Charles Christopher Williams was booked and charged with murder, kidnapping, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a violent crime. He was immediately questioned and gave a lengthy confession without requesting representation. Dr. Pamela Crawford with the Department of Mental Health and the State Law Enforcement Division interviewed Williams for several hours. She is a forensic psychiatrist and is often called for severe cases, especially those that may involve the death penalty. Charles confessed to Dr. Crawford as well and explained some of the events leading up to the murder. Charles revealed to her that he kept a journal and that it detailed his plans for that day. Police issued a search warrant for his mother's home, and the journal was found in his room. He had drawn a layout of the Bilo store, wrote down Mandy's work schedule, and even listed the clothing he planned to wear. He wrote in it that he planned to give Mandy a choice. He could strangle her or he could shoot her. It would seem like he followed his plan, as Mandy could be heard on the police calls screaming for help, saying he was going to kill her. He may have told SWAT that he only wanted to talk to her, but he was giving Mandy her choices of death. In the end, she chose neither and did the only thing she could do, and that was run. Mandy was laid to rest in Hillcrest Memorial Park on Saturday, September 6th. Charles Williams' trial started in February of 2005. His attorneys were William Nettles and Greenville County Public Defender John Malden, both of whom had experience in capital murder cases. The prosecutor for Greenville County was Solicitor Bob Ariel. He announced early on that he would be seeking the death penalty in this case. The rumors around the courthouse were that Ariel was trying to make a name for himself. This case drew national attention, and he intended to make a point. And there was a lot of pretrial publicity. particularly about the journal, which Williams's attorneys were fighting to keep out. Their reasoning was that Charles told Dr. Crawford, the state's psychiatrist, about the journal, even though she told him that she worked with the police and was not officially treating him. He still spoke with her willingly, as he did to the police. The judge agreed with the prosecution that the journal would have been found anyway with a basic search warrant executed at the defendant's home. And I agree with this. It was in his bedside table drawer, not even hidden. But Dr. Crawford's testimony would be controversial in the sentencing portion of the trial, as she characterized Williams as coherent and cooperative. Jury selection was an exhaustive process. Potential jurors not only had to be certified for a capital case, but were questioned extensively about their feelings towards biracial relationships and mental illness. Mandy was white and Charles is African American. Charles Williams's attorneys were pleading diminished capacity. They insisted that Charles slowly began unraveling after Mandy broke up with him in May. He did have a suicide attempt and had even taken himself to Greenville Memorial, saying he was suicidal, but he was not hospitalized. And I imagine that this is why they tried so hard to keep the journal out of the trial. It shows thoughtful premeditation. This wasn't just a man who snapped. This was a man who planned the attack meticulously. And Charles also had 2 letters in his wallet. One he said he wanted to give to Mandy, professing his love, and in another he again wrote of his plans to kill her. But you could see his irrational intention to murder the woman he loved as a descent into madness. He begged the SWAT team to shoot him when they got to him in the store. He expressed to another mental health professional that he just wanted to die, that he wanted to be with Mandy. The trial lasted 5 days. There was a lot of emotional testimony from Mandy's co-workers about what they saw. One of them had even tried to intervene and testified that Charles put a finger to his lips for her to be quiet and then slowly pointed the barrels of the shotgun at her head. So she fled. Her co-workers and friends wept as they recalled having to leave her there and run for safety. His defense attorneys tried for a Hail Mary to keep the 911 tapes out. Their point was that in hearing Mandy's crying and pleas for help, they were essentially letting a witness testify who could not be cross-examined. Solicitor Ariel was incensed that the defense had waited this long to object to the tapes, which had been in evidence from the beginning. But the judge ordered an overnight recess to consider his ruling. Charles certainly had no expectation of privacy as he talked to the police, and the tapes were evidence of his demeanor. I think in some cases the defense can argue that 911 calls are too inflammatory or easily misinterpreted, but they don't often win. And this was a hostage situation in which the defendant had several conversations with negotiators. Those tapes were always going to be played in court. Also introduced at trial were William's statements to police immediately following the shooting. He claimed that he had been about to lead Mandy outside to surrender, but she grabbed the gun and managed to pull the trigger. One SWAT team member seemed to support this theory, as he at first only heard 1 shot, but right after that heard 3 in rapid succession. I suppose this could be true, and Williams did maintain to police that he had only gone in the grocery that day to get Mandy to talk to him. But it contradicts the plans found in his journal. He explicitly said he was going to kill Mandy. I believe it's more likely his plan was for murder-suicide. After 5 days of testimony, the jury only took 90 minutes to find Charles Williams guilty of murder and kidnapping, as well as for the firearms charge. And then the trial moved on to the penalty phase. Defense attorneys assembled a team of doctors and a social worker to testify to Williams's mental health. The social worker interviewed family and friends, and the doctors assessed Charles for neurological and psychological issues. Dr. James Evans testified that Charles Williams suffered from neurological impairments due to damage to his frontal lobe, which caused learning disabilities and problems with impulse control. However, an MRI done on Charles Williams a week before trial showed no damage to his frontal lobe, though testing did show cognitive issues. Clinical psychiatrist Dr. Robert Richards testified that he had diagnosed Williams with bipolar and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Yet another psychiatrist testified to Charles as suffering from a major depressive disorder. But probably the best witnesses for the defense were Charles's family and an elementary school teacher. His teacher testified to a disconnected young boy with cognitive issues. His father testified that Charles's mother Daisy had drank heavily while pregnant. Charles's sister Maureen agreed with her father, remembering her mother's drinking but couldn't say how much. She also emotionally recounted her parents' bitter divorce, to the screaming fights and negligence she and her brother had suffered through. She sobbed as she told of the day her mother walked out, how her father had burned their baby books and pictures in their backyard. Maureen testified that neither of her parents were loving and said that she had no emotional connection to them. As an adult, she sought therapy for these issues and was leading a normal life with no relationship at all with her parents. She cried as she told how much she wished she had helped her brother, that Charles, being even younger, was more impressionable and really needed psychological help. In rebuttal, the state called Dr. Pamela Crawford, the forensic psychiatrist who had interviewed Charles shortly after the murder. His defense attorneys objected heavily to her testimony. She was an agent of the state, called in to evaluate his mental health for their purposes. She often worked with the police on potential death penalty cases, and therefore her testimony could be interpreted as biased in favor of the prosecution. And it was for this reason that Dr. Crawford had not been qualified to testify as an expert during the penalty phase. Solicitor Ariel insisted she was testifying as a lay person, which was allowed during the penalty phase, and fought to keep her on the stand. The judge ordered the jury to disregard anything Dr. Crawford said about the death penalty, but the prosecutor kept asking her leading questions on why she was brought in on Charles's case. Defense attorneys interrupted her repeatedly until the judge gave further instructions that she had not been qualified as an expert. I feel like this may have been confusing to jurors, as Dr. Crawford had the credentials of a forensic psychologist. And her testimony was definitely effective for the prosecution. She portrayed Charles Williams as coherent when she spoke with him, and even expressive. She said he was calm, pleasant, and cooperative during the hour she spoke with him, and he willingly confessed to her and talked to her about the events leading up to the crime. After closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate sentencing. Should Charles Williams die for his crimes or spend his life in prison? After 5.5 hours, the jury sent a note to the judge explaining that they were split 9-3 for imposing the death penalty and asked for instructions on what procedure to follow as they were not in agreement. Out of the presence of the jury, the judge informed prosecution and defense counsel that he intended to give an Allen charge. Basically, with an Allen charge, the judge is telling jurors to continue deliberations until they come to a unanimous verdict. Williams' defense team objected and moved for a mistrial. They also made a motion for the judge to impose a life sentence, as well as a motion challenging the judge's plan to use the Allen charge. The judge denied all 3 motions and sent the jury back in to deliberate. After almost 4 more hours of deliberation, the jury did reach a verdict. They recommended that Charles Williams be put to death. However, the Greenville News reported that when the jury returned to open court, 2 jurors were openly crying and a third had his head in his hands. They clearly had trouble with this decision. But after their verdict, trial judge J.C. Nicholson sentenced Charles Williams to death. Many automatic appeals come with a death sentence, but most of Charles Williams's appeals at the local, state, and federal level were all centered around the trial judge's decision to impose the Allen charge on the jury. Given the note that the jury gave to the judge, Williams's attorneys argued that they essentially told the judge that they were deadlocked and he should have immediately imposed a life sentence by law or declared a mistrial. Their contention is that the Allen charge is coercive to the minority voters in the jury, meaning the judge sent them back in there to work it out and the other 9 jurors wore down the 3 holdouts. Jurors ask for instructions from judges all the time. In this case, the major issue is that they revealed their vote when they did so. But appellate judges at every level upheld Judge Nicholson's decision. Then in 2017, Williams petitioned the U.S. District Court for a writ of habeas corpus, which is requiring a person under arrest to be brought before a judge to secure their release unless lawful grounds are shown for their detention. There were 11 grounds in the claim, and the district court denied all but 1. Williams' appellate attorneys claimed ineffectual counsel at his trial, as his trial attorneys failed to investigate fetal alcohol syndrome as a mitigating factor. Though Charles Williams' mother, Daisy Huckabee, had been accused of drinking while pregnant, the charge was not further investigated. Defense attorneys Nettles and Malden had assembled a team of professionals testifying to Charles's mental health issues, but fetal alcohol syndrome was not discussed. When questioned, Nettles and Malden could not explain why they didn't look into it further. But they would hardly argue against something that may get their client off of death row now. His MRI did not show any damage, nor did he have the corresponding facial abnormalities. Maudlin did testify that FAS awareness had become much more prevalent in the years since Williams had been convicted. And the truth is, fetal alcohol syndrome is difficult to diagnose and even more difficult to prove. There is no lab test that can be done. Absent the mother's confession to heavy drinking or documentation of it by her doctors at the time, the criteria to diagnose FAS is 3 factors. One is facial abnormalities, mainly having to do with the skin around the lips and nose, as well as the space between the corners of the eyes. The second one is documentation of growth deficits, either throughout childhood or, in Williams's case, found when he was examined. The third criteria is documentation of central nervous system abnormalities, either in structure, function, or neurological, or a combination of all 3. Considering the psychiatric and neurological doctors who testified to Williams' disabilities, he did have an argument for this third criteria. And he had doctors testifying at his appeal who were experts in the field. During his trial and appeals, many people testified to Charles's cognitive issues, from his family to a teacher as well as psychiatrists. I spoke with one mental health professional who interviewed Charles not long after the verdict, and she estimated that Charles had been functioning on the level of a 15 or 16-year-old. He certainly was not fully mentally impaired, but he lacked impulse control and struggled with decision-making. This would be in keeping with the sort of damage that fetal alcohol syndrome can do to the frontal lobe. Though Charles's MRI did not show visual abnormalities, it is possible he still had cognitive and functional issues due to FAS that wouldn't necessarily show on an MRI. Dr. Natalie Novick-Brown, a forensic psychologist, testified at the appeal that Williams exhibited many symptoms, problems with self-regulation and control, behavioral difficulties, and she said she believed he had the coping skills of a 9-year-old. First, a magistrate judge agreed and vacated Williams's death sentence. Then District Court Judge Michelle Childs upheld this decision. In deciding a death penalty case, the prosecution must present aggravating factors. In the Williams case, Solicitor Ariel only presented the fact that the murder took place during a kidnapping. The aggravating charge that Williams put others in danger by carrying out the murder in a public place was not presented. Had his counsel offered more mitigating circumstances, the jury may have found Charles Williams less culpable and sentenced him to life in prison rather than death. And considering that there were 3 holdout jurors, this certainly could have been a possibility if more evidence had been entered about fetal alcohol syndrome. Opposing counsel argued that the mitigating factors of mental illness were presented during his penalty phase, and that introducing fetal alcohol syndrome would have only resulted in a, quote, fancier mitigation case. But just last month, on February 5th, 3 circuit court judges agreed with the magistrate and district court. Charles Williams' death sentence has been vacated, and he is to be sent back to the state for resentencing. However, South Carolina can still appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, so Charles Williams is not completely out of the woods. I want to be clear with you that I'm not trying to debate the death penalty in general, but as in regards to this case specifically. It's difficult because I believe that there were aggravating circumstances equal to the mitigating points brought up in the penalty phase. The prosecution only presented the kidnapping charge as aggravating. But I think it's fair to say that the firearms charge should have been equally aggravating. Charles Williams walked into a public establishment, pointing his shotgun at bystanders, and then held Mandy Lee Williams hostage, terrorizing her for almost 2 hours before he shot her to death. His journal showed meticulous planning and premeditation, and I do believe that even if he was cognitively impaired, this level of planning is fairly sophisticated. However, considering all of the mental health professionals and family who testified to Charles's mental issues, I do believe the mitigating factors were equal to the aggravating, even without the further exploration into fetal alcohol syndrome, which is difficult to prove. But I think what swayed me a bit more in this case was looking at the death row prisoners in South Carolina. The state by far does not have a high number of prisoners on death row. There are only 38, where many states have well over 100. And Charles Williams, by comparison, is unusual in this group. Most men on South Carolina's death row committed multiple murders. A few are in for torture and murder. There are murderers who kidnapped and raped, and there are child murderers. I am not claiming that any one life is worth more than another, not at all. But it's clear from the sort of men who are usually sentenced to death in South Carolina that Charles Williams was different. He was 20 years old and diagnosed by mental health professionals as cognitively impaired. I think the only other factor that may compare to other inmates is that he put other people at risk by bringing the shotgun into Mandy's place of work. But he did not harm anyone else and surrendered without incident. But this aggravating factor of putting others at risk was not even argued during his penalty phase. And I am not discounting Mandy's suffering or that of her family. Her daughter would be close to 18 years old now, and she and Mandy's family have suffered not only through her death, but through the trial and many appeals Charles Williams was entitled to. Their pain is immeasurable. But I'm also not sure that a young man with mental disabilities should be sentenced to death. I think that the prosecutor who discounted the fetal alcohol syndrome as just a fancier mitigation tactic was wrong. Charles Williams has the right to have all evidence considered, and many professionals believe he indeed suffers from fetal alcohol syndrome. To me, the main issue here would be the Allen charge. Now, this is not why Williams' sentence was vacated, but in my mind, it should have been the bigger issue. When jurors are deadlocked in a capital punishment case, the law says the judge should impose a life sentence. That isn't what happened here. Jurors go through a grueling process to make sure they are suitable for a capital case. In fact, the papers characterize this jury selection as more arduous than the trial itself. It's difficult to find 12 people who would be willing to impose the death penalty if required. 30 jurors were selected so that there would be plenty of alternates if any issues arose, but none did. But when it comes down to it, the juror must vote their own conscience. As all 12 had been qualified as jurors in a death penalty case, it's not that they oppose the death penalty in general, but 3 of them did feel that Charles Williams's mitigating factors were enough to spare his life. Clearly, his mental health was a factor in their voting, regardless of fetal alcohol syndrome being the underlying cause. And I think we should trust our juries, especially those who are willing to sit for a capital case. And yet, the largest issue in this case is the failure of the system in general. Mandy Leigh Williams was not protected by our judicial system and was in fact discouraged to pursue a restraining order after a violent assault by her ex-boyfriend. South Carolina then and now ranks the deadliest state in domestic violence murders. There have been reforms in the state, and had Charles Williams been convicted of the assault, he likely would have been sentenced to 26 weeks of treatment at the State Domestic Abuse Center. But while he was out on bail, he took a shotgun and murdered Mandy Leigh Williams, who felt she had no other option but to move on with her life and hope that the justice system would prevail. She had no protection while she waited for justice. And it's not just South Carolina, but our whole country that needs to reform domestic violence legislation. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 1 in 3 female murder victims are killed by intimate partners. It's an epidemic that obviously needs to be addressed within our culture, but tougher legislation would be a damn good start. If you or someone you know is suffering from intimate partner abuse in the United States, please call the Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Services for the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada are listed in today's show notes. Southern Fried True Crime is written and produced by me, Erica Kelley. The original graphic art is by Coley, and Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio. Special thanks to Ashley Reece for suggesting today's case. As always, if you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend or rate and review on iTunes. I'm on most large platforms like Stitcher, as well as a new podcast app called Himalaya. Like you guys, I'm always looking for a better way to manage all the podcasts I listen to, and I really like the ease and functionality of Himalaya. If you're interested in supporting the show, I have a Patreon page with many different rewards for different levels of donation. Or you could visit my website, southernfriedtruecrime.com, where you can make a one-time donation just by hitting the donate button. I also have a merchandise store open. Just go to whatamaneuver.net and click on Shop by Store, then search for Southern Fried True Crime. I have all sorts of t-shirts, tanks, hoodies, and even onesies for babies. If you have any comments, corrections, or suggestions, you can email me at southernfriedtruecrime@gmail.com. I love hearing from you guys, and I'm always looking for new cases, so please feel free to reach out. I'm also all over social media. Just search the show name in your favorite platform if you'd like to connect with me there. If you're interested in discussing this case or any other episodes further, come check out my discussion group. It's linked to my main Southern Fried True Crime Facebook page. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.